One of the biggest misconceptions people carry after experiencing narcissistic abuse is believing that the ultimate victory comes when the person who hurt them finally admits they were wrong, apologizes sincerely, or suffers enough to understand the pain they caused. It's a natural desire because the human heart longs for justice. When someone has manipulated you, lied to you, humiliated you, or made you question your own reality, it's understandable to want them to feel what you felt. You may imagine that if they could just experience the loneliness, confusion, and heartbreak they created, everything would somehow be balanced. But that belief quietly keeps your emotional well-being tied to someone who has already taken too much from you. It places your peace in the hands of a person who has consistently demonstrated that they are unwilling or unable to protect it. This is why true healing begins with a profound shift in perspective. The goal is no longer to make them hurt. The goal is to make sure they can never hurt you the same way again. Those are two completely different objectives. One keeps you looking backward, hoping for a reaction. The other moves you forward, building a life that no longer depends on their choices. When your focus changes from controlling their response to strengthening your own recovery, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop measuring your progress by what they do and start measuring it by who you are becoming. Narcissistic individuals often thrive on emotional dependence. Whether the relationship was romantic, familial, professional, or social, they frequently seek influence through emotional highs and lows. They may create confusion, withhold affection, offer inconsistent approval, or make you feel responsible for problems you did not create. Over time, you can become so accustomed to managing their emotions that you neglect your own. You begin to believe your value depends on keeping them happy, avoiding conflict, or earning small moments of acceptance. Without realizing it, your identity becomes wrapped around someone else's unpredictable behavior. Healing is the process of untangling that emotional knot. It starts with recognizing that your worth was never determined by how someone treated you. Their cruelty did not reduce your value. Their rejection did not define your identity. Their inability to love in a healthy way was never evidence that you were unlovable. It was evidence of their own limitations. This realization does not erase the pain overnight, but it changes the direction of your journey. Instead of asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" you begin asking, "Why did I believe someone else's opinion could determine my worth?" That single question opens the door to lasting freedom. One of the hardest parts of recovery is resisting the urge to monitor the narcissist's life. You may wonder if they are happier without you, whether they miss you, or if they have changed for someone else. These thoughts can consume enormous amounts of emotional energy. Every social media update, every rumor, every mutual acquaintance becomes another opportunity to reopen old wounds. Yet every moment spent watching them is a moment not spent rebuilding yourself. The attention you continue giving them becomes a form of emotional investment, even after the relationship has ended. Imagine taking all of that energy and directing it inward instead. Every hour once spent replaying painful conversations could become an hour spent learning something new. Every tear shed over their rejection could become motivation to strengthen your confidence. Every anxious thought could become a reminder to practice healthier habits, deepen meaningful friendships, pursue long-forgotten dreams, or rediscover the passions that once made you feel alive. Healing is not passive. It is an active decision repeated day after day, even when emotions try to pull you back into familiar patterns. There is also a common belief that if the narcissist never regrets what they did, then justice has somehow failed. But regret is not something you can manufacture in another person's heart. Some people never acknowledge the damage they have caused because doing so would require confronting truths they desperately avoid. Waiting for that moment may keep you emotionally trapped for years. The freedom you seek cannot depend on another person's conscience. It must be rooted in your own decision to move forward regardless of whether they ever change. Ironically, the outcome many people secretly hope for often becomes most likely when they stop chasing it. When you no longer seek revenge, validation, or acknowledgement, you become emotionally unavailable to the cycle that once controlled you. You stop participating in the patterns that fed the dysfunction. Your calmness replaces chaos. Your confidence replaces insecurity. Your peace replaces constant emotional turmoil. Whether the other person notices is no longer the point. The transformation has already accomplished something far more valuable. It has given you your life back. This kind of growth requires patience because emotional wounds rarely disappear all at once. Some days you will feel strong and hopeful. Other days, an unexpected memory, familiar place, or simple song may bring old emotions rushing back. That does not mean you are failing. Healing is rarely a straight line. Progress often looks like needing less time to recover after a difficult day, responding with greater wisdom than before, and gradually discovering that what once dominated your thoughts now occupies only a small corner of your memory. Every small step matters because lasting transformation is built through consistent choices rather than dramatic moments. As you continue healing, something beautiful begins to emerge. You become less interested in proving anything to the person who hurt you and more interested in becoming the person you were always capable of being. You begin making decisions based on peace instead of fear. You choose relationships that are marked by respect instead of control. You recognize manipulation more quickly and no longer confuse intensity with love. Your confidence is no longer borrowed from someone else's approval because it is rooted in a deeper understanding of your own value. That is where lasting victory is found. It is not in watching someone else fall. It is in refusing to let their actions determine the rest of your story. The greatest response to cruelty is not becoming consumed by revenge, but becoming transformed by healing. When your life reflects peace instead of bitterness, wisdom instead of resentment, and strength instead of fear, you demonstrate that what was meant to break you ultimately became the foundation that made you stronger. That is the kind of victory no one can take away because it is built from within rather than granted by the person who once tried to convince you that you were never enough. One of the most significant turning points in recovering from a relationship with a narcissist comes when you finally stop seeking their approval. This sounds simple on the surface, but for someone who has spent months or even years trying to earn love, respect, or validation from a narcissistic person, it can be one of the hardest emotional battles to win. The desire for approval is deeply human. We all want to be accepted, appreciated, and valued by the people closest to us. However, a narcissist often turns that healthy desire into a tool of control. Instead of giving consistent love and encouragement, they make approval feel like a prize that must constantly be earned. One day they may praise you, and the next day they criticize the very qualities they once admired. This unpredictable cycle keeps you emotionally invested because you begin believing that if you just try harder, become better, or avoid making mistakes, you will finally receive the acceptance you've been longing for. The problem is that the finish line keeps moving. Every time you think you've done enough, another expectation appears. Every sacrifice you make is met with another demand. Every effort to explain yourself becomes another opportunity for them to twist your words or make you feel guilty. Without realizing it, you stop living according to your own values and begin living according to their constantly changing standards. Your happiness becomes dependent on their mood. If they are pleased, you feel relief. If they are disappointed, you feel anxious. If they ignore you, you question your worth. This emotional dependency slowly becomes one of the strongest forms of control because they no longer need to force you to obey. You begin policing yourself in hopes of keeping their approval. This is why breaking free starts with understanding that genuine love is not designed to keep you constantly proving your value. Healthy relationships encourage growth, but they do not make affection conditional upon perfection. They allow room for mistakes, honest conversations, and mutual respect. A narcissistic relationship often operates differently. Approval is given sparingly because scarcity increases its perceived value. The less often they validate you, the harder you work to receive it. It becomes emotionally addictive. You remember the rare compliments, the brief moments of kindness, or the occasional expressions of affection, and those memories convince you that if you just remain patient, the loving version of them will return permanently. Yet those moments often function as temporary rewards that keep you invested in a cycle that ultimately benefits them more than it benefits you. As long as you continue chasing their approval, they remain at the center of your emotional world. Every decision is filtered through one question: what will they think? You may change your appearance to satisfy them. You may hide your opinions to avoid criticism. You may abandon friendships because they disapprove. You may suppress your dreams because they make you feel selfish for pursuing them. Over time, your authentic identity becomes difficult to recognize because it has been shaped around avoiding rejection rather than expressing truth. Freedom begins the moment you realize that someone who refuses to appreciate your genuine self will never be satisfied by a version of you that exists only to please them. In fact, the more you sacrifice your identity to gain their approval, the less they tend to respect you. Narcissistic personalities often mistake self-sacrifice for weakness and healthy boundaries for defiance. They may become uncomfortable when you begin expressing independent thoughts or making choices that no longer revolve around their preferences. This reaction is not proof that you are doing something wrong. It often indicates that the balance of control is changing. When you stop seeking approval, something remarkable happens inside you. Your attention shifts from external validation to internal confidence. Instead of asking whether they approve of your decisions, you begin asking whether your decisions align with your values. That subtle change transforms the way you live. You become less afraid of disappointing people because your sense of identity is no longer built upon pleasing everyone around you. You recognize that disagreement does not diminish your worth, and that criticism is not always a reflection of your character. Sometimes it simply reflects another person's unwillingness to respect your independence. This change also affects the way a narcissist perceives you. They often expect emotional reactions because those reactions reassure them that they still have influence. If every criticism leads you to defend yourself, every insult causes you to doubt yourself, and every silent treatment sends you chasing after them, they receive constant confirmation that they remain emotionally significant in your life. But when you become secure enough to stop seeking their approval, those familiar patterns begin to disappear. You no longer feel compelled to justify every decision. You stop over-explaining yourself. You become comfortable allowing misunderstandings to exist when the other person has no genuine interest in understanding you. Your peace becomes more valuable than winning arguments that were never fair to begin with. Learning to trust your own judgment is an essential part of this process. Narcissistic relationships often leave people doubting their instincts because manipulation repeatedly teaches them to question their own perceptions. You may have been told that your feelings were too sensitive, your memories were inaccurate, or your concerns were irrational. Eventually, you begin relying on the narcissist to define reality for you. Recovering means slowly rebuilding confidence in your own ability to observe, think, and decide. Each time you honor your intuition instead of ignoring it, you strengthen your emotional independence. You also begin surrounding yourself with healthier influences. Instead of investing your energy in people who make you constantly prove your worth, you gravitate toward relationships where respect is mutual and encouragement is genuine. You discover that healthy people celebrate your growth instead of feeling threatened by it. They communicate honestly instead of manipulating through confusion. They appreciate your individuality instead of trying to reshape you into someone easier to control. Experiencing these healthier relationships often highlights just how exhausting it was to spend years chasing approval that was intentionally withheld. There may still be moments when you wonder whether you made the right decision or whether things could have been different if you had tried harder. Those thoughts are normal because emotional habits take time to break. But each time you choose self-respect over people-pleasing, honesty over pretending, and peace over constant emotional striving, you weaken the old patterns that once kept you trapped. You begin realizing that your value has never depended on another person's willingness to recognize it. As your confidence grows, you stop seeing approval as something that determines your identity. Instead, it becomes what it was always meant to be, a pleasant addition when it comes from healthy people, but never the foundation of your self-worth. That is the moment a narcissist loses one of their greatest sources of influence. When you no longer need their validation to believe in yourself, they can no longer control your emotions through praise, criticism, or rejection. Your confidence becomes rooted in truth rather than opinion, and that kind of confidence cannot be manipulated because it no longer depends on the approval of someone who was never capable of giving healthy love in the first place. One of the greatest lessons a person learns after experiencing narcissistic abuse is that boundaries are far more powerful than arguments. Many people enter difficult relationships believing that if they can just explain themselves clearly enough, present enough evidence, or communicate with enough patience, the other person will eventually understand their perspective. This belief comes from the way healthy relationships function. In healthy relationships, honest conversations lead to greater understanding. Both people are willing to listen, reflect, admit mistakes, and work toward solutions together. But when you are dealing with a narcissistic personality, the rules often change. Conversations that should resolve conflict become opportunities for manipulation, blame, confusion, and emotional exhaustion. One of the reasons this happens is because many narcissistic individuals are not approaching the conversation with the same goal you are. You may enter a discussion hoping to find understanding, rebuild trust, or solve a problem. They may enter the same discussion focused on protecting their image, avoiding responsibility, or maintaining control. Those completely different objectives make meaningful communication extremely difficult. Every explanation you offer may be dismissed. Every feeling you express may be criticized. Every concern you raise may somehow become your fault. Instead of leaving the conversation with clarity, you often leave questioning yourself. This creates a painful cycle. Because you feel misunderstood, you try even harder to explain. You carefully choose your words. You rehearse conversations in your mind. You gather examples to support your point. You hope that if you remain calm enough, logical enough, or compassionate enough, they will finally recognize the truth. Yet each new attempt often leads to another argument that leaves you feeling more confused than before. The problem is not necessarily that your explanation lacks clarity. The problem is that you are expecting honesty from someone who may have little interest in genuine accountability. This is where boundaries become life-changing. A boundary is not an attempt to force another person to behave differently. It is a decision about what you will and will not allow in your own life. That distinction is incredibly important because many people misunderstand boundaries as tools for controlling others. In reality, boundaries are expressions of self-respect. They define how you choose to respond when someone repeatedly crosses lines that protect your emotional, mental, or physical well-being. For example, instead of repeatedly arguing about disrespectful language, a boundary might sound like, "If this conversation becomes insulting, I will end it." Instead of begging someone to stop manipulating you, a boundary becomes, "I will not continue discussing this if the facts are being intentionally distorted." Instead of constantly defending yourself against false accusations, you simply refuse to participate in conversations that exist only to attack your character. Notice that none of these boundaries require the other person to agree with you. They focus entirely on your own actions. This shift changes everything because it removes you from endless debates that never produce healthy outcomes. Narcissistic individuals often thrive in prolonged conflict because conflict keeps your attention centered on them. Hours can disappear as you defend yourself against accusations, explain your motives, or attempt to correct distorted versions of reality. The longer the conversation continues, the more emotionally drained you become. Eventually, you may even begin apologizing for things you never did, simply because you are exhausted and desperate for peace. Healthy boundaries interrupt this pattern. Instead of trying to win every argument, you recognize that not every accusation deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every criticism needs to be defended against. Sometimes protecting your peace is far more valuable than proving your innocence to someone who has already decided not to believe you. One of the reasons boundaries feel uncomfortable at first is because many survivors of narcissistic relationships have been conditioned to believe that saying no is selfish. They have learned to prioritize another person's comfort above their own emotional health. Whenever they attempt to establish limits, they may immediately experience guilt, fear, or anxiety. These emotions do not necessarily mean the boundary is wrong. More often, they reflect how unfamiliar self-protection has become after years of self-sacrifice. A narcissistic person may also react strongly when you begin enforcing healthy boundaries. They may accuse you of being cold, selfish, disrespectful, unforgiving, or unreasonable. They may attempt to make you feel guilty for changing. They may even become unusually kind for a short period if they believe kindness will encourage you to remove the boundary. These reactions can be confusing because they often create hope that things are finally improving. While genuine change is always possible for anyone who sincerely commits to personal growth, temporary changes that disappear the moment your boundary weakens are very different from lasting transformation built on accountability. Boundaries also require consistency. Establishing a limit only to abandon it every time someone pressures you teaches them that persistence is more effective than respect. Consistency does not require anger or hostility. It requires calm determination. You do not need to raise your voice, threaten, or seek revenge. You simply follow through on what you have already decided. Over time, this consistency strengthens your confidence because you begin trusting yourself again. Every time you honor your own boundary, you reinforce the belief that your well-being matters. Another powerful effect of boundaries is that they reveal the true nature of relationships. Healthy people may not always like your boundaries, but they generally learn to respect them because they value the relationship. Unhealthy people often view boundaries as obstacles to control. They may repeatedly test them, criticize them, or attempt to convince you that you have no right to establish them. Their response provides valuable information. It shows whether the relationship is built on mutual respect or on one person's ability to dominate the other. As your boundaries become stronger, your emotional life begins to change in ways you may never have imagined. You spend less time recovering from unnecessary arguments. Your thoughts become clearer because they are no longer consumed by endless attempts to justify yourself. You stop measuring your value by another person's opinion and begin making decisions based on wisdom instead of fear. The emotional energy once spent defending yourself becomes available for building healthier relationships, pursuing meaningful goals, and creating a life marked by stability instead of constant chaos. Perhaps the most freeing realization is understanding that silence is sometimes stronger than the perfect argument. Walking away from manipulation is not weakness. Refusing to engage in circular conversations is not surrender. Declining to defend yourself against every false accusation is not an admission of guilt. It is the recognition that your peace is too valuable to sacrifice in conversations designed only to keep you emotionally trapped. Boundaries quietly communicate something that endless explanations never can. You respect yourself enough to protect your mind, your heart, and your future, even when someone else refuses to respect them. One of the most powerful ways to respond after experiencing narcissistic abuse is not by dedicating your life to proving someone wrong, but by dedicating your life to becoming the healthiest, strongest, and most fulfilled version of yourself. Many people who have been hurt by a narcissist naturally imagine that success means watching the person who mistreated them finally experience failure or regret. They picture a day when the narcissist realizes what they lost and desperately wants another chance. While those thoughts are understandable, they can quietly keep your focus fixed on the past. The greatest transformation begins when your motivation shifts. Instead of asking, "How can I make them see my value?" you begin asking, "How can I build a life that reflects the value I already have?" That single change redirects your energy from chasing validation to creating a future filled with purpose. Narcissistic relationships often leave people believing that their dreams are less important than keeping someone else satisfied. Over time, goals are postponed, talents are hidden, and opportunities are ignored because so much emotional energy is spent managing conflict, avoiding criticism, or trying to preserve peace. A person who once had confidence may begin doubting every decision. Someone who once enjoyed pursuing new challenges may slowly convince themselves that they are incapable of succeeding. This is one of the most damaging effects of emotional manipulation because it reaches beyond the relationship itself and begins shaping the way you see your own potential. The recovery process involves reclaiming every part of yourself that was neglected while trying to survive the relationship. It may begin with small decisions that seem almost insignificant at first. You return to hobbies you abandoned years ago. You reconnect with supportive friends you were encouraged to distance yourself from. You begin reading, learning, exercising, creating, or developing skills that remind you there is more to your identity than the pain you endured. These small acts of self-investment gradually rebuild confidence because each one sends the same powerful message. Your life still matters, your future still matters, and your growth deserves your attention. As your confidence begins to return, you realize that success is not limited to career achievements or financial accomplishments. Success includes emotional stability after years of chaos. It includes sleeping peacefully without constant anxiety. It includes making decisions without fearing someone else's reaction. It includes learning to trust your own judgment again after being taught to question your perceptions. These victories may not always be visible to others, but they represent profound changes within your character. They prove that healing is not simply about surviving difficult experiences. It is about allowing those experiences to shape wisdom instead of bitterness. Many survivors unknowingly remain emotionally connected to the narcissist because they continue measuring every achievement against the hope that it will finally earn recognition. They may think, when I become successful, they'll realize they were wrong, or when they see how happy I am, they'll regret everything they did. Although these thoughts may provide temporary motivation, they still place the narcissist at the center of the story. Your accomplishments become performances designed for an audience that may never appreciate them. Genuine freedom arrives when your goals no longer exist to provoke someone else's reaction. You